Alright, yeah, and welcome back to some more Magic Duels. Today we're going to be taking a look at a 4-colour Cartouche and Trials deck. So, without further ado, let's get into the deck, shall we? What is this deck based around? Well, it works around the value of the Trials and their synergy with Cartouches. So, as an example, Trial of Ambition is 1 and a black for an enchantment. 3 of them. We're going with the full set in this particular case. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent sacrifices a creature, so it's just a sacrifice on a stick, essentially. It's like a flesh bag, but in enchantment form. It also says, whenever a cartouche enters the battlefield under your control, return Trial of Ambition to its owner's hand. So, cartouches are the things with aura cartouche attached to them, such as Cartouche of Knowledge, 1 and a blue, for an aura cartouche, so you enchant a creature you control, and the Cartouche of Knowledge enters the battlefield, and it draws you a card. Enchanted creature then gets +1/+1 and has flying. So it does a thing, and then it has a permanent effect to the creature that it's attached to. And when the cartouches come down, every trial on the battlefield that's on your side goes right back to your hand. So we'll go through all of the trials and cartouches as we go up. We've got a Trial of Solidarity. So 2 and a white for an enchantment. We're only running a single copy, and I'll get to why in a second. But when Trial of Solidarity enters the battlefield, creatures get +2/+1 and gain Vigilance until the end of the turn, and then it has its Cartouche bounce. We've got the Cartouche of Ambition, which is 2 and a black. This one puts a -1/-1 counter on a creature, and then the creature that you enchant gets +1/+1 and lifelink, running 2 copies of that. Because the Enter the Battlefield ability is not overly powerful, but the lifelink is quite nice, so we're running 2, but not the full play set. We then have Trial of Strength. This is pretty much the linchpin of the deck. This is the reason why this deck works in the way that it does. 2 and a green for an enchantment. Trial of Strength enters the battlefield, creates a 4/2 green beast creature token. So that puts creatures on the board for us to attach cartouches to, essentially. And we've got Cartouche of Strength, 2 and a blue for a cartouche. When you enchant a creature, when it enters the battlefield, you have the enchanted creature fight another creature, so it's removal again on a stick. So the enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and tramples. We give it a little bit of a pump, and then it fights a creature we don't control. So we pretty much use all of our creatures to essentially work as removal spells. Finally, we've got Trial of Knowledge, so for 3 and a blue, running 3 copies of this one, because whenever it enters the battlefield, we draw 3 cards and discard a card, and we can bounce that again to keep redrawing. So, the entire deck's built around these cartouches, and it honestly leaves very little in terms of customization, let's say. It's very much an easy-to-build deck, but the slots that you put in the middle of it are quite important. So we've got things like Blessed Spirits, which is 2 and a white for a 2/2. 3 mana, really important because it gets around Fatal Push without the Revolt trigger, and pretty much dodges the main source of removal, essentially. It's got flying. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you put a 1/1 counter on Blessed Spirits. So when we cast a Trial, we give a counter. When we cast a Cartouche, we get a counter, and it bounces the Trial, so we can counter that again. So Blessed Spirits can get very, very much out of hand if we allow this to continue. We then have Auramancer as well. So for 2 and a white, for a 2/2, when it enters the battlefield, you return a target enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. So we can return either Trials or Cartouches. We'll probably have one or the other in our graveyard. Synergizes quite well with the Trial of Knowledge, because we can actually discard the card that we want to grab back with Auramancer. So not really losing a card in that sense, because we actually enable Auramancer to do its job. It's also here as well, so we can get back the Sigil of the Empty Throne as well, which is an alternative win condition. This allows us to get pretty much out of hand as far as our cartouches and trials are concerned. So 5 mana, whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you put a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying onto the battlefield. So you can imagine how many angels we can get when we're playing trials, attaching cartouches to the angels that we create, which bounces the trials. We replay the trials, we get angels, so on and so forth until they're dead. We also want big creatures as well, so Tireless Tracker is another big creature for us. 2 and a green for a 3/2. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to investigate, which essentially means you get a clue onto the battlefield that you can pay 2 to sacrifice it and draw a card. And whenever you sacrifice a clue, you put a 1/1 counter on Tireless Tracker. So it's card advantage. It's a big creature that we can push through. We can give it lifelink with our Trial of Ambition, flying with our Trial of Knowledge, and trample with our Cartouche of Strength. I meant to say Cartouche, not Trial. I will get that confused a fair few times, don't you worry. So we can really make big creatures with the Trials and Cartouches that we have available. On to the next one, we've got Nyssa, Voice of Zendikar. Nyssa, Voice of Zendikar is an interesting one. There might be better slots for different permanents, but this one's been doing quite well for me at the moment. So 1 and 2 green for a 3 loyalty planeswalker. You +1 and you get yourself a 0/1 plant creature token, which enables cartouches essentially. But there's a lot of planeswalkers that can do that kind of thing. But the reason why we put this one in is because we actually like to put these counters on each creature you control, the -2 ability. One thing you will notice about the Trial of Strength is that it makes 4/2s, and being able to minus and make them 5/3s dodges a little bit more removal than they would normally. So the minuses is quite good, especially when we start going wide and stuff like that. Nyssa can do a lot of work. A lot of the times as well, I've been able to ultimate in playtesting, a fair few times in fact, and I haven't played that many games, but I have ultimated Nyssa quite a lot with this deck. The -7 says that you gain X life, draw X cards, where X is the number of lands you control. So I believe you draw probably around 6 or 7 cards, something like that, and gain 6 or 7 life from our ultimate, which is pretty good. We're already drawing a ton of cards with our Trial of Knowledge and our Tireless Trackers and things like that, but the life gain can be really good to stabilize as well, so this is pretty sweet. We then have Woodland Wonder as well. Figured since we were actually attaching auras to creatures and we were running 4 colours, we might as well run Woodland Wanderer, which is a 3 and a green with Vigilance and Trample. Enters as a 2/2, however, it enters the battlefield with +1/+1 counter on it for each colour of mana spent on it. So we have 4 colour, we spend 4 colours on it, we actually make a 6/6 Vigilant trampling creature, which can get past quite a lot of stuff. And then if we start attaching cartouches to it, then we get out of hand quite quickly as well. So Woodland Wanderer, pretty solid card. We then have Cast Outs as our catch-all card. So 3 and a white for an enchantment with flash, which means we can cast it on our opponent's turn if we choose to do so. When it enters the battlefield, we get to exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Cast Out leaves the battlefield. So it's an enchantment that deals with planeswalkers, enchantments, artifacts, anything that our Trial of Ambition essentially won't hit. The cartouches, the Cast Out will do instead. And it also triggers our Sigil of the Empty Throne and our Blessed Spirits and stuff like that. So the synergy is pretty nice there. The other alternative would be Anguished Unmaking, but as I said, the synergy is a bit lacking if you go for that one. Plus you also lose life, and you don't get this sweet little cycle at the bottom here. So you can cycle it for 1 white to discard it if it's not going to be useful to draw another card, or even cycle it to draw a card and then return it with Auramancer as well. Nice little synergies. We then have our panic buttons, should we say. Yahenni's Expertise is 2 and double black for a sorcery speed. All creatures get -3/-3 until the end of the turn. And then you get to cast a card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. So hopefully we get to wipe the board. And once we do that, we get to cast anything that's 3 or less, which is Nyssa, any of our Trials and Cartouches, which if we are bouncing our Trials and Cartouches back and forth, back into our hand, we should be able to Yahenni's Expertise, wipe the board, and then add a 4/2 to the board straight away. So we'll have some blockers down if there are hasty creatures or anything like that. Next we've got Planar Outbursts, same sort of thing. 3 and 2 white, except for this is just a catch-all removal spell. Proper Wrath. Sorcery speed, destroy all non-land creatures, just kills everything. Except for our Cartouches and Trials, which is pretty sweet. Well, it will kill our Cartouches because they'll be attached to creatures, but you get what I mean. Awaken 4, we can pay it for 5 and 3 white. We get to turn a land into a 4/4 and swing with it straight away after wiping our opponent's board as well. So if they're on 4 life, we could just win out of nowhere with Planar Outburst, which is pretty cool. We then have Nyssa, Vital Force. So for 3 and 2 green, we got a 5 loyalty planeswalker. A +1 allows us to untap a land we control, and then until the end of a turn, it becomes a 5/5 elemental creature with haste. So we get to +1, swing for 5, And if we don't want to do that, we can wait until our opponent ends their turn with a 5/5 back to defend our Planeswalker if we want to do that as well. The -3 though is one of the reasons why I'm keeping Nyssa in here. Allows us to return target permanent card from our graveyard to our hands. So we get to return creatures, cartouches, trials, Planeswalkers, anything we want. We can just straight up return it. So Nyssa can be quite useful there to re-establish a board presence after a wipe or a lot of removal. Her -6 as well is quite cool. So we only need to +1 once in order to be able to ultimate Nyssa. So if we go for the -6, which will kill her, we get to create an emblem with whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. We don't really need this emblem, to be honest. We draw plenty of cards as it is, but if we haven't got maybe our Trial of Knowledges established on the board without cartouches, then maybe we need the card draw, and we can turn our lands into card draw. It is a May ability as well, so we can't mill ourselves with this ultimate, so there is that to consider. Finally, we've got Ajani, Unyielding. Always a decent card in any kind of permanent focused deck. So for 4, a green and a white, we've got a 4 loyalty Planeswalker. His +2 allows us to reveal the top 3 cards of our library. You put all non-land permanent cards revealed this way into your hand, the rest onto the bottom of your library in any order. So, other than lands, the only non-land permanents that we've got in the deck are our board wipes. So there's 3 cards that are not lands that Ajani won't hit. So there's a good chance that when we +2, we actually get to draw 3 cards from Ajani, which is pretty sweet. And they'll be effectively creatures, card draw, removal, all of that kind of thing. Ajani will hit. The -2 as well can be crucial in the right circumstances. We get to exile target creature and its controller gains life equal to its power. So if our opponent Ulamogs us, we can slam down on Ajani, minus and exile the Ulamog right off the board. If our opponent's got a lethal threat, then we can exile it. They do gain life, but our deck kind of runs on a pretty long game, so we're not really against our opponent gaining a lot of life. We can make work of that. Because you can imagine with the Sigil of the Empty Throne, the amount of angel creature tokens we'll be making, we'll be able to swing over and make up for that life gain in no time at all. The -9 is probably one of my favourite ultimates in this game, to be honest. -9, you get to put 5 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, and 5 loyalty counters on each other Planeswalker you control. In the case of the Planeswalkers, we can only hit 1 Planeswalker, which isn't the greatest thing in the world. We're not really set up to use the -9. It's mostly here for these first 2 abilities, so if this opportunity does present itself, though, the 5 +1/+1 counters on each creature could mean a lot of Sigil of the Empty Throne Angels with 5 counters on them, so 9 9s in the air, ready to swing, which is pretty brutal and probably will win you the game on the spot. So that's essentially the deck. We'll go on to the mana base. It's pretty simple, to be perfectly honest. We've got 3 plains, 2 islands, 2 swamps, and 4 forests. We are running significantly more white and green than any of the other 2 colours, but we do kind of need these basics in here just to make sure that our buddy lands and our check lands and things like that all come into play untapped. We've got Sunken Hollow, which is an island swamp that enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands, hence why we are running basics. And we've got the same in Canopy Vista as well, but it is a forest or a plains. Next, we've got our buddy lands. These are essentially lands that come into play tapped unless you control a swamp or a forest. So if we've got a basic swamp or forest, in the case of Woodland Cemetery, it comes into play untapped as soon as turn 2. And you should also note as well that the Sunken Hollow is an island and a swamp, so it does actually check those with the Woodland Cemetery. So we can go turn 1 Sunken Hollow, turn 2 Woodland Cemetery, and we've got 2 dual lands untapped ready to go on turn 2. We've got 2 copies of Drowned Catacomb, which is essentially the same thing as well, in blue and black. Hinterland Harbour in green and blue. And finally, Isolated Chapel in white or black. So that's essentially the deck, guys. I do hope you like the look of the deck, and if you do, then there is a link at the end of this video to the matches if you want to check those out. If you did enjoy the deck tech as well, be sure to like and subscribe for more Magic Duels content in the future, as well as other stuff. And if you hit that little bell icon as well right next to the subscription button, you'll get notifications when I release new videos. I do hope you've enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.